Hi hobby friends, let's talk about oil paints. Different music, different vibe. We're mixing things up a little bit today. I'm not averse to a little oil paint, in fact I'm quite partial to the slow drying, gloopy older cousin of acrylics. That said, my approach to oils has almost always been as a technical paint. I use them to grime things up or zip through panel lining in a flash. I suspect they have a lot more to offer, and I've seen other painters do some pretty amazing things with them, not least almost every European canvas painter you've ever heard of. So let's try something new today and see what happens. One thing I know about oils is that you almost certainly don't want to use them as the foundation to your mini. Oils need a fair amount of body to get the kind of opacity we want. No problem on a flat canvas, but a big problem for the detailing on a miniature that can be fractions of a millimeter deep. So, I've been starting with a fairly extensive acrylic base here. Molotow black as my primer, followed up with Vallejo black just because I prefer the finish of that paint. I gave the bodies a really light zenithal highlight with Vallejo somber grey too, but to be honest, I'd skip this step next time. It might help pull out the volumes a little bit, but ultimately it wasn't really necessary. The heads, which I've kept separate along this very handy piece of sprue they give you in the new Guardians box set, starts with Molotow burgundy and then gets layered up with bone white and finally a natural white. If I didn't know I was going over this with oils later, I would have spent more time layering up on this to get a more solid result, but at least at the time I thought this would do. The weapons get a somewhat arduous 3 layers of Vallejo heavy khaki. This gets us a nice flat base that, despite its slightly unappealing green tinge, puts us in the right area of the spectrum for the bone finish we're after. There are a few simple details to catch in red, then a quick whip round on the metallics, 3 splodges of chocolate brown, and all the important colour blocks are in place. Time to get these oils set up. If you're completely new to oils, here's the basic lowdown. You'll need at least 2 brushes completely separate from your regular ones. Once a paintbrush has been used for oil paints, it basically can't go back to being an acrylic brush, at least not one worth using. So, pick up a separate set for your oil experiments, or better yet, in the beginning just use old brushes you have. You'll see why you need at least 2 later. You'll also want a separate dry palette. I would highly recommend getting a paper tearaway one like this. One big put-off for oil paints is the slightly more annoying cleanup, and anything that makes that easier is worth whatever they're charging. The last important thing you'll want are 2 little cups of white spirit, aka mineral spirit, aka whatever you call it where you are. This is what we use instead of water for oil paints, so the cleaning and the thinning agent. You can, and I think should, use cheap, hardware shop odourless mineral spirits. I, at least, can't tell what the benefits of using more expensive artist brand ones is. Okay, let's get some paint on these minis. Here is the property of oils I'm really interested in today. Super crazy easy blending. For some painting projects I want to spend a long time with the mini, futzing over glazes and blends with acrylic paints. But for a lot of projects, especially larger units like this 10-man squad, I'm all about procedure and results. Could oils be the key to getting really high quality without spending a month on 10 squishy cannon fodder foot soldiers? I'm hoping so. You can see what I'm doing here is really roughly laying in unblended blocks of colour with one of my brushes, the wet one, that I'm dipping into mineral spirits and paint liberally. When a section, or even the whole mini, is laid out with this initial sketch, that's when we grab our dry brush. I'm using a flat brush here because they tend to have just the right rigidity for this. Then, with Bob Ross in our hearts, we swoosh the brush very, very delicately over the painted area. The direction and pressure here are important. Although it might not look like it, this is a step that you have to have your brain switched on for. If anything, it takes a little more finesse than the previous blocking in step. I don't want to give any definitive recommendations until I've done more of my own experiments, but I will say this: pay attention to how the paint is moving under your brush, because that's really what it'll do, shift and move in response to your strokes. Here's something else that seems worth further exploration: edge highlighting. Something in the smooth consistency of oils makes running them along sharp edges a real dream. However, one downside, or at least one learning curve, is brush management. With acrylics, of course, it is important to make sure you're loading your brush carefully to give you a good tip and the right consistency of paint for whatever you're doing, but this is even more important with the thicker oils. The paint can hold your brush tip in almost any shape you press it into, and if you aren't careful, you can end up with a shovel of pigment rather than the precise applicator you're looking for. Nonetheless, this is definitely something I want to do again as my manual skill with oils increases. I also wanted to look at glazing too, but I'll save the deep dive on that for another time, since this is just a quick intro vid. So, let's look at what we ended up with. Okay, not bad. Could I have gotten these looking a little better with a pure acrylic approach? Of course, I'm still getting to grips with these oils, but sometimes you have to take a step backwards before you can make a leap forwards. Certainly, these worked as a proof of concept. The oil stage of this job took a couple of evenings of painting. With some more experience, that'll drop way down, and it's already beating what I could do with regular acrylic blending over so many models, I think. So, what do you think? What are your experiences with oil paints? Do you feel like giving them a whirl if you haven't already? Let me know down below, and if you have your own oily efforts you want to share, head over to the linked Discord and join the growing and lovely community of painters over there. Cheers!